So we are back. We are here in part 2 of a 6 or 7 part series regarding all things whipped sugar soap scrub, or just a whipped soap base if you don't want to turn it into a scrub. And we will get there with all of it for sure. This recipe and all of the information within this video is going to be focusing on creating a whipped sugar soap scrub from soap shreds. You know, like you take a bar of soap and you shred it down. And some people think that all you can do is just like rebatch that into an ugly, crumply bar of soap. But that's not true. You can do all kinds of cool things with soap shreds. And that's awesome, especially for people that like bevel and stuff. Anyway, I will tell you more about all of this. I'm like getting way ahead of myself because there's still an intro and stuff to do. And it would be sad if I forgot that thing. So we will talk more about the recipe and the day and all of the awesome things in just a minute. But before we do that, hello, I am Mrs. Soap and Clay. Let's make stuff. How's it going, sudsers? Welcome back to the channel. You are at Soap and Clay, where we make all the soapy things, and you are here for day 348 of 365 days of soap, and today is part 2 in a 6 or 7 part series, I'm not quite sure which yet, of whipped sugar soap scrubs, or a soap base that can be turned into lots of other things. But for this one, we are specifically focusing on whipped sugar soap scrubs, because there are a lot of ways to skin that cat, which is a terrible saying, and I'm aware of that. Yesterday we did a recipe that I use in my line and have given you before, but one of the most common comments and questions that I got on that original video was about the dual lye process. Do you need dual lye? And so we will talk about this more in the video itself, but just right off the top to answer that question, no, you don't need dual lye in something like this. The reason that dual lye existed in that original soap paste was because that was part of a series wherein I was turning one soap paste into multiple different products. And a dual lye solution containing the potassium hydroxide is going to be wildly easier to turn into a liquid soap than a solution that just has sodium hydroxide. That said, you can also turn soap paste into a liquid soap if it's just made out of sodium hydroxide. That is a bit more of an advanced technique though, so, you know, we'll get to that in another playlist, probably. We don't have time for that today. Probably not. Speaking of more advanced techniques, actually, all of this kind of is a more advanced technique, and while I'm out here saying, oh yeah, super simple, or whatever, it actually does require a fair bit of either just basic, you know, baking knowledge and how you whip and incorporate air into things knowledge first and foremost. But if you don't have that, the ability to, you know, actually watch the video and listen to the instructions, because that's where we give the instructions, is throughout the making of the thing usually. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I completely understand that. I am definitely that person that when I'm looking for a baking recipe online, I'm just scrolling through this blog post wondering why it's so long just to get to the ingredients list. Like, I get it. I do it too. But when my souffle ends up looking like brownies, I don't immediately just assume that the original author of the recipe decided to troll the internet by putting out a bad recipe, because that would be weird. And instead, I go back and I read the things that I skipped through. And every single time, it's always, oh, that's why. That's why it didn't work. So if you don't have that basic knowledge in hand and you are a less experienced soap maker, do listen to the instructions that are provided by myself, by any other soap maker, because in all honesty, every soap tuber I know out there, they're not doing this as their career. They're just like putting out recipes and videos and stuff. That's not their job. They don't get paid for it. They don't have to give recipes. They're choosing to, like I'm choosing to, and we want to explain the process so you end up with a good end result and you're not frustrated. So just do keep that in mind for all advanced recipes, and these will all sort of be considered that realistically. Now, on to the actual point of all of this. What we are doing today is we are again making a whipped sugar soap scrub from soap shreds. This particular soap shred is a 100% coconut oil soap made with sodium hydroxide with a 0% super fat. It's an old dish soap, like a dish soap. We've done that a few times on the channel. And so as a result, we're probably going to expect the bubble to be bigger because it's a 100% coconut oil soap. So that's good that the bubble is going to be there, but also you're going to run into some problems with potential over drying of the skin. So we're going to talk about throughout this, while we make this and do the recipe thing and whatever, what the chemistry behind all of this is. Answer some more of those questions that were on that original post and some misinformation that was actually being thrown out there regarding glycerin and sugar and stuff, as well as do the test and all the things. So, let's get to the video so we can do everything that I just said. Okay, so today we are going to be looking at a whipped soap sugar scrub from soap shreds, really. And so here's what it is. You can use 50 to 100% of the shred weight in water and 50 to 100% of the shred weight in glycerin. And so I am just basically going to make this exactly the way, with the same percentages really as the recipe that I gave you yesterday. And so I'm going to use 6 ounces of shred, 6 ounces of water, and 4 ounces of glycerin. Now, the reason that I am using so much water and the reason why it's such a big amount, like between 50 and 100% of the total weight of the shred, has a lot to do with A, what the shred is made out of, and 2, more importantly, how long it's been sitting. In this particular instance, I am using soap shreds from a 100% coconut oil soap with a 0% super fat, and it's a dish soap, and it was sitting for a very, very long time. It has been sitting for a very long time. It stopped losing water weight a long time ago. And so for that reason, I want to do full water. If you are shredding down a fresh soap that has not had the opportunity to lose all of its water weight yet, you can definitely use less water in all of this, because it's going to be taking the water that's still in the soap and it hasn't fully, released yet, incorporating it with the glycerin, effectively becoming a solvent to stabilize the whip itself, turning this into, a sort of melt and pour soap, really. And then, go from there. So that's why we have 50 to 100% of the total weight of the paste for that. For the glycerin, it's much the same, but that has more to do with, again, the types of oils that you are using within this. Now, and also your environment. Now, for this particular recipe, I am using about 75%, I think. Those are the maths of the glycerin, again, just because I want to follow with the same percentages that I used for the paste, well, the paste recipe that we did yesterday, because, reasons, keep everything reasonably consistent, but also I could do more glycerin in this and it might be a benefit to the end product, because again, a 100% coconut oil soap at a 0% super fat is going to be rather drying. So in an effort to reduce that, especially in an exfoliating product where that dries out your skin anyway, you could put more glycerin into it, because glycerin is a humectant. It has humectant properties, drawing moisture to the skin. So that's good. Okay, and also for the stearic acid, you saw that I had put on there you're going to put into the entire solution between 10 and 30% stearic acid. Why? Well, for the stearic acid itself, it's known as a co-emulsifier when you are working in formulations such as like lotions and whatnot. But because soap, by its very nature, has already been emulsified because of the lye solution, it's not acting as a co-emulsifier here so much as a thickener. It's not required to keep this entire solution in solution, and so nothing separates, but it's going to be a good thickener for a product like this. And so you have your, again, your solvents essentially with your water and your glycerin that are working to separate and elongate essentially the crystalline structure within the cold process soap itself. Then you have the stearic acid that is essentially stabilizing the whip, what you are doing here, and will impact the thickness or thinness of the actual whip itself. And so if you want a thicker product, put in more stearic acid. In between that 10 to 30% use is very good. If you go above that 30% mark, you will start to deal with some waxiness from the product, because a lot of stearic acid, a lot of palmitic acid, a lot of, things like that. If you have too much of that in your solution, you are going to end up feeling waxy as a result. But anywhere between 10 and 30%, depending on how thick you want something for your stearic. And that's going to be one of the better ways to adjust the thickness of your product, as well as potentially playing with the water. In the post that Swift Creek Soaps made on Saponification Nation, there was a very interesting discussion about glycerin and, water, and therefore that's why it's runny. That is not accurate. And if you start messing with especially the glycerin and removing the glycerin, but really both within all of this, you are going to run into problems wherein you're not going to be able to whip this. It is going to deflate immediately. It's going to be not the creamy, whippy consistency that you were looking for, because again, these are acting as the solvents. We have a polar bond between the water and the glycerin, as well as within the actual, molecular formula of what soap even is, working to extend, the crystalline structure. So those are needed, and taking any of that out will yield a batch of soap that's never going to properly whip up. You can reduce your water to a point, but in order to deal with a problem wherein maybe your product is too thin and you want it to be thicker, reducing the glycerin isn't going to accomplish that, because that's not what glycerin is being used for, chemically within this conversion here. So increasing the stearic would actually help. Now, if you are already at your max level of stearic acid in all of this and it's still not as thick as you would like it, consider reducing the amount of water in the next batch. Now, we will actually be doing a test wherein we do just that and we add less water to a batch, as well as a test of how you can fix it on the fly. In this instance right here, though, as you can see, same rules apply as did yesterday. You whip it cool and you don't over whip it. With these same formulations, this is not a thin batch of soap. Not when you add the sugar, not in any instance whatsoever. Unfortunately, it's actually so thick that it's going to be a little bit difficult to pipe it with my impossibly small tip. As I said, guys, I don't pipe my whipped sugar soaps, and the tips that I have in my house at my disposal are all for little piping of things on, cupcakes and stuff. And so once I stopped wanting to use the Russian piping tips or whatever, this was all I had. And so it's a very tiny tip. It's bad. It's, yay, I'm good at piping. I'm not, but as you can see, it's pipeable. And if you were using the proper size tip with the big wide opening or whatever, that would be a delightful Instagram video, wouldn't it? It would be so beautiful. As it is, this is my life. But this recipe in and of itself, what it is right now, is completely pipeable without any, runny weird issues. But again, if you wanted to make it thicker, play with the stearic acid. Don't do too terribly much with the glycerin, hoping for a thinner or a thicker product on either end. So there's that. Now, also within that whole glycerin conversation, there was a lot of, talk about the sugar dissolving. Technically speaking, sugar will eventually dissolve in glycerin and or water. I mean, like my kids just did that test in their science class last year in STEM about how to dissolve, sugar in water and under what constructs that occurs. And so going back to, grade school science, we remember that, sugar can dissolve in water and also in glycerin with the right constructs. And really what that is it's easier to dissolve in hot water and or glycerin and with a smaller surface area of the sugar itself, because the molecular formula of, the sugar is polar and water and glycerin also. And so they start forming bonds. But in a solution like this, the sugar should not be dissolving for a very, very long time. Also, look at that beautiful lather. Look at that. That's delightful. There you go. There's another way to do the thing with a, from essentially soap, well, not essentially, literally soap shreds. And this is a 100% coconut oil soap. So, of course, you're going to get a big bubble. But the payoff or the downfall of that is also you're not getting the moisturizing properties. But it is possible to get a better lather based on the oils that you are putting into the original soap in the first place. So that's good. But yes, to the dissolving of the sugar bit, eventually everything, like the sugar will break down, but I have whipped sugar soap scrubs that if I can find them and get them out from several years ago with the receipts to show that they are in fact several years old, and we can test them and see, if there's still any sugar in there. Eventually everything will break down, but because the glycerin and the water are working in really interesting ways chemically within all of this, not only within the molecular formula of the soap itself to sort of disrupt that, but also with each other. They're working, they've already formed a bond as well between the water and the glycerin. The sugar is basically going to remain unscathed because it's a pretty complex, molecular formula for quite some time. So that's also something to remember. And there you have it, a whipped sugar soap scrub from a soap shred. And that shred is specifically a 100% coconut oil with a 0% superfat. Now, again, keep that in mind. While that bubble was beautiful, nice, tiny, tight little effervescent bubbles, just so delightful, it does have the potential to be drying, especially on skin that's already dry. So that is where the importance of paying attention to your glycerin ratios really come into play, as well as maybe considering adding a secondary oil to it in the melting stage. You can add another oil up to 10% in this particular formulation, but just remember that if you do that, you will need to adjust your water and your glycerin to reflect that increase. So your soap shreds plus your oil, so 50 to 100% of your water and your glycerin, and the stearic acid, again, gets calculated based on all of those things together. So soap shred, an additional oil, your water, your glycerin. You get it. Also within this, I did not mention or even talk about putting a preservative in, but a preservative is a good idea in a whipped sugar soap scrub if you're going to sell it. Not because it has any risk of going bad, because it doesn't. The pH doesn't support that, but because the end user is probably going to use it in the shower. If you live in the United States, it is still your choice as to whether or not you do that. I do recommend it for this application, and you can put the preservative in according to the instructions on the preservative that you have selected. It's generally between 0.5 to 1% of the total batch weight before the sugar. The sugar doesn't count in this preservative base. It gets confusing. We will talk more about the preservatives in an upcoming video. Give it a whole lot of time, but to that, also, you can include your preservative. Yes. And all of these instructions are actually on the Discord with the recipe list, all of the ratios, why for the ratios, and, the information for the preservatives and everything in the Discord. on its little channel. So Discord members, feel free to check that out, save that, do the things. Yes, have fun. And, you know, I don't know, make this soap now. If you guys want to get crazy, you can make all these things along with me and you can test them yourselves. And at the end of this entire soapy playlist journey, you can figure out which whipped sugar soap scrub actually works best for you, which one you like the best, for sure. I am really glad that you guys joined me today. Thank you so much. A big special thank you to my sudsers, to the people who are subscribed, to the people that are in my Discord, my members, my people, my VIPs, all of the people doing all of the soapy things. Thank you. You're amazing. I appreciate you. I appreciate that the sudsers are the kinds of people that will stick around and listen to the recipes and not just skim looking for the written recipe thing and miss all of the teaching, because I like to teach. Anyway, thank you so much again for joining me for another round of 365 days of soap. Next up in the playlist is actually an interesting recipe that came about because of this post on Saponification Nation, and we are going to actually test her recipe and talk about how to substitute oils in your soap paste recipe and why things can go wrong. So look forward to that. That's the one that's coming up next. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm out of here. I will see you guys all again tomorrow for another round of soapy fun. Bye.